Australia, recently hailed as the fourth best country in the world by US News and World Report in 2023, reveals that not even unwelcome house guests like snakes in the toilets, kangaroos at the door, oversized spiders, and one-of-a-kind bugs can steal the spotlight. Australia, with vibrant cities like Sydney and Melbourne, stunning landscapes, low crime rates, a robust economy, high quality of life, accessible healthcare, low unemployment, and top-tier education, lives up to its lucky country reputation. Though, for a moment, let's pretend we don't know what Donald Horne really meant by that. Now, while everyone else is throwing shrimp on the Barbie,
let's put another shrimp on the Barbie.
Let's take a peek at the not-so-shiny parts of the land down under that don't make the tourist brochures. Before we dive into the chapters of this video, comment below with your thoughts too about Australia. Back in the 18th century, the Brits found themselves in quite a pickle. They had more prisoners than they knew what to do with. The American Revolution, which concluded in 1783, had cut off the once convenient option of sending convicts to the American colonies. You see, the English transported their convicts to America, where they served as a source of cheap labor. About 2,000 convicts were sent to the 9 American settlements per year, totaling roughly 50,000 convicts transported across the Atlantic Ocean. However, with America gaining independence, this option was no longer available. So they needed a new solution. In the late 1700s, Captain James Cook embarked on a series of voyages to explore the vast, uncharted lands of the South Pacific. His voyage marked the first recorded European contact with the eastern coastline of Australia, although it's worth noting that Australia had been encountered by the Dutch in 1606. And there are also theories of earlier Portuguese exploration. Cook landed on Botany Bay on the east coast of Australia, in the area now known as New South Wales. Never mind those indigenous folks that had been there for thousands of years. The Brits decided, we'll take that, thank you. The British government, always one for multitasking, saw an opportunity here. They could simultaneously rid themselves of their pesky criminal class and expand their empire without losing any of their law-abiding citizens. And they weren't picky about who they shipped off to their newfound paradise. Stealing a handkerchief? You're in. Forgery? Pack your bags. Pickpocketing, burglary, or swiping goods worth more than 5 shillings? Welcome aboard. Rioting? Well, you get the idea. The offer for offenders was simple. You could either enjoy a nice vacation in the penal colony or, well, face the alternative, death. As part of their punishment, convicts were sentenced to penal transportation for 7 years, 14 years, or even life. During the journey, nearly 2,000 convicts perished in cramped, unsanitary conditions, succumbing to diseases like cholera. Limited space, insufficient supplies, and hunger worsened the mortality rate. The arrival of the First Fleet in Botany Bay in January 1788 marked the beginning of convict transportation to Australia. This fleet included 736 convicts and 1,000 settlers, led by Captain Arthur Phillip. The fleet first arrived at Botany Bay, but that place was a dud for habitation. The soil was of poor quality, there was limited access to fresh water, and the bay was unprotected and open to attack. So they did what any reasonable group of people would do. They moved. About a week later, they set up shop at Port Jackson, now known as Sydney Cove. Over the next 80 years, approximately 160,000 convicts were transported from England to Australia. Governor Phillip was like, let's get organized, and instituted a system where convicts were put to work based on their skills. Now, the initial goal was to establish some serious agricultural production, but there was a bit of a hiccup. They were running low on skilled labor and livestock. So, who stepped in to save the day? The convicts, of course. They were forced to roll up their sleeves and build a young colony from the ground up, constructing roads, bridges, and public buildings. Even the free settlers got in on the action, petitioning the government to assign convicts to work on their farms. bringing convicts in pretty lousy health. Those who could work were expected to toil away for a solid 10 hours a day, breaking their backs in punishing conditions. They tackled tasks like brick making and timber cutting, often with bellies grumbling from the limited food. The first free settlers didn't roll into New South Wales until 1793, but convicts were still the majority until the gold rush in the 1850s. Their sentences were clear: work from sunup to sundown, Monday to Saturday. This wasn't just punishment. The colonial administration saw it as an opportunity for redemption. Governor Phillip believed that honest sweat was the convicts' best chance for improvement. So, they were working their way to a clean slate, one brick and the shovel at a time. Life for convicts was far from a walk on the beach. They had to follow strict rules, and any slip-up could mean some serious consequences. Wipings, leg irons, and solitary confinement were all on the menu. Those who really misbehaved were in for some special secondary punishments. This often meant being exiled to charming places like Norfolk Island, where they got to enjoy more suffering and extended quality time in solitude. The transportation penal system hit its peak in the 1830s, after which the number of convicts dwindled. In fact, only 6% of them were locked up. The rest were working for the government or free settlers, and with good behavior, they could earn a ticket of leave, a conditional pardon, or even an absolute pardon. The last convict ship arrived in Western Australia on January 10, 1868. Other settlements, like Victoria and South Australia, emerged as free colonies. Protests and changing attitudes towards crime and punishment played their part in bringing an end to the penal system. Surprisingly, the majority of convicts decided to stick around in Australia even after their sentences were served. Once they were free, they could own land, and some even nabbed key positions in the colonial government, proving that there's hope for a fresh start. Let's not forget that the convict saga and colony building weren't the only shows in town in Australia at the time. We need to rewind the clock and remember the folks who had called Australia home for tens of thousands of years: the Indigenous Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. When the British settlers rolled up in 1788, the estimated population of Indigenous Australians on the continent was somewhere between 750,000 and 1.25 million people. The arrival of the British also brought diseases that unleashed devastating epidemics among the indigenous population. As if that weren't enough, British settlers also began encroaching on and taking land from the indigenous peoples. This led to conflicts and resistance from some Indigenous Australians, resulting in violent clashes on the edges of the colony. Historian Henry Reynolds' research estimates that in these frontier conflicts, up to 3,000 Europeans and at least 20,000 Aboriginal Australians lost their lives. More recently, Raymond Evans from the University of Queensland has shown a light on this largely unpublicized guerrilla war, estimating that 66,680 Indigenous people lost their lives in 6,000 attacks by settlers and native police in Queensland alone. Queensland was the most densely populated part of Australia before settlement, and it became the epicenter of this heartbreaking struggle. Between 1910 and 1970, Australian government policies aimed at assimilation gave rise to a tragic chapter known as the Stolen Generations. During this period, between 10% to 33% of Aboriginal Australian children were forcibly taken from their families and homes. These children were placed in adoptive families and institutions, where they were often forbidden from speaking their native languages, and their names were frequently changed. In 2008, Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd issued a national apology for the government's actions towards the Aboriginal Australians who were part of the Stolen Generations. Since then, Australia has been making efforts to reduce social disparities between Aboriginal Australians and non-Indigenous Australians. Today, 20 to 30% of Aussies can trace their roots back to these original conflicts, and around 3% of Australia's population has Aboriginal heritage. Australia's story is a rich and complex one, marked by both adversity and progress. As the nation continues to evolve, it remains crucial to honor its history, acknowledge its Indigenous cultures, and work towards a more inclusive and equitable future for all. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thought-provoking content.